Now that the Switch is almost 8 years old, and Nintendo is in talks about their next console being around the corner, it's finally time to realize that the Switch is at the end of its era. And I know this console will go down as one of the most important of all time. Nintendo has been making home consoles and handhelds for decades, but the Switch was the first time they put both of these ideas together and made something truly special. So today we're going to look back at every year of the Switch and see what made this console so important. Prior to the release of the Switch, it was referred to as the Nintendo NX. From the mid-2000s to the early 2010s, Nintendo was on an absolute hot streak. The GameCube did alright, but with the Wii, they really knocked it out of the park. They stopped trying to compete with PlayStation and Xbox in the general gaming category, and made the Wii a console that was accessible to literally anyone. If you can move your arms, you can play the Wii pretty well. And it worked. Go into any retirement home across the country, and I'm sure there's at least one person playing Wii Sports to this day. So when it was time for a new Nintendo console, everyone was certain it was going to work incredibly well. And we got the Wii U, which definitely was a game console. Now, I absolutely love the Wii U, and I think it's probably the most underrated Nintendo console of all time. But everybody can agree that that console was a commercial failure. It sold pretty terribly for a load of reasons, but the main one was mostly the marketing. With the PlayStation, you had PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, which is a numerized order they had from the start, so everyone knows they're getting an upgrade. And Nintendo had that going for them with the Nintendo Entertainment System, and then followed up by the Super Nintendo, and even the 64 based its name off of the 64-bit CPU. And then with the GameCube, they really just called it what it was. It's a cube you can play games on. And that followed suit with the Wii, so when it came time for the Wii U, the name sounded more like an expansion to a pre-existing console than it did its own standalone unit. Now, if they called it the Wii 2 or gave it its own unique name, I'm sure that would have helped a little bit, but even looking at the two consoles, you can tell that there was not much of a difference, which led to the Wii U unfortunately crashing and burning sales-wise. And during this time, Nintendo was really saved by the fact that the 3DS was a pretty solid success. And shortly after the release of the Wii U, Nintendo got to work at developing their next console. Now, one of the big features of the Wii U gamepad is that you could play your games on the gamepad. And it worked really well, but if you strayed too far away from the console, everything started to fall apart and the cracks really started to show. So their goal for the next console was to be able to blend the home console experience with the portability of their handhelds. And they didn't want to make a new DS or a new Wii, they wanted to make something entirely unique. And in March 2015, we got our first details about the Switch's new design. Nintendo referred to it as the NX and described it as a brand new concept that wasn't going to be similar to the 3DS or the Wii U landscapes they had currently. And then in April 2016, they announced they planned to release the NX worldwide in March 2017. And finally, we got our first-hand look at the Switch for the first time at E3 2016. I will always miss E3, and it's for this exact reason. We got incredible releases, and the pre-E3 hype around the new Nintendo console was absolutely real. Now, we didn't get any visuals of the console, but we did get a load of information about the games that were coming to it. We were also informed that the new Zelda Breath of the Wild would be coming to the system, and is no longer going to be a Wii U exclusive. But it wasn't until October of 2016 that we officially got the name Nintendo Switch. I remember watching this trailer for the first time and going absolutely feral. Nintendo started setting the Switch up to be the combination that everyone had long dreamed of. A new device that had the power of a home console on the go. And then the day finally arrived where the Switch was released on March 3rd, 2017 worldwide. The Switch released with 5 physical release launch titles. There was 1-2 Switch, which was a party game that was meant to show off the strength of the Joy-Con, and it had a load of different motion control minigames. There was Just Dance 2017, which was fine, I guess. If you like to dance, I'm sure you'd love it. There was Skylanders Imaginators, which really launched in the end of 2016, but was ported to the Switch for a day 1 release. There was Super Bomberman R, which was a new Bomberman title, which was fine. Now, I'm not the biggest Bomberman guy, but when the console first came out, I played a lot of this. They even had some digital-only releases like Snipper Clips and Shovel Knight, but what everyone was most excited for was The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. For the first couple years of the Switch, this was the game that everybody was dying to play. It was the game that brought Zelda into a true, boundless open world setting, where the only limit to what you could do was set by your imagination. Now, to a lot of people, this is one of the best games ever made, and one of the best games we got for the Switch. But others who like a more traditional Zelda experience may not find this to be the best thing ever. Now, personally, I put hundreds of hours into Breath of the Wild, and I will never look at that as a bad thing. As someone who had just recently dropped out of college at the time, I was 100% invested into this game. So needless to say, the Switch was off to a solid start right after release. Now, even though it didn't have the largest selection of titles off the bat, it did get some great games in 2017. Just over a month after release, we ended up getting Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is by far the best-selling Switch game on the console. They ported over Mario Kart 8 from the Wii U and added a load of new content, including all of the DLCs that were added in the first game, some new characters, and even more additional content, which made it a really standout experience. There's a solid chance if you own a Switch, this is one of the games you own. And for good reason. Not only did this game look stunning, but it's one of the best Mario Karts we've ever gotten. In May 2017, we ended up getting Minecraft for the Switch. I mean, it's Minecraft. It's gonna sell well on whatever console it's on, and you could even play this game on the 3DS. So there was no way that Mojang was gonna wait to put this game on the Switch and get the game into as many hands as possible as early as they can. In June 2017, we got ARMS, which was a brand new Nintendo IP that used the motion controls from the Joy-Cons to deliver a unique boxing experience. Now, I don't think ARMS is the best game ever made. It really feels like they took the Wii Sports Boxing and said, let's just do this again, but a little bit bigger. But as a new Nintendo IP, I love the idea, and I love how they were trying to do something new with the Joy-Cons. For people who love the Wii, this was a great game to show the strength of this console. In July, we ended up getting Splatoon 2, which was the sequel to the incredibly popular Wii U game. It had tons of new weapons, maps, and game modes. So if you were a fan of the original Splatoon, it was an absolute must-play. Nintendo really started focusing on Splatoon during the Wii U era, and I'm not surprised. It's a third-person shooter with a lot of cool mechanics. I really love Splatoon, and I think Splatoon 2 was an incredible thing to get on the console, especially this early. And of course, Nintendo wasn't slowing down in 2017, and we got the release of Super Mario Odyssey in October. I think when Super Mario Odyssey came out, everybody realized that the Switch was an absolute unit. Odyssey is one of the most refreshing Mario games we've ever gotten. It felt like a perfect combination of all of the other 3D Mario games that came before it. It gave Mario the ability to not only play in a 3D environment, but also some 2D sections. And of course, the idea of taking control of any creature that you see on the map was absolutely iconic. Now, if you were near a child in 2017 and they had a hat near them, there was a solid chance you were gonna get hit, but that was well worth the cost for one of the best Mario games we've ever gotten. And in November of 2017, we got Doom and Skyrim. Now, if you release a console, there's a solid chance Bethesda's gonna put Skyrim on it pretty early on. It's one of the most iconic games ever made and one of my favorites of all time. But the Switch version isn't that great, but being able to play it on the go is something I never thought I was gonna be able to experience. And Doom was on a similar boat. Does it run incredibly? Not really, but the fact that I could bring it wherever I want to go was an awesome idea. And to wrap the year up, we ended up getting Xenoblade Chronicles 2. A much anticipated sequel to a great game series that I think is criminally underrated. For a launch year, I can't think of a single console that outperforms the Switch. You had a day one release of Breath of the Wild, followed up by Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and then followed up again by Mario Odyssey. 3 absolute titans of the Switch's library, all released within a few months of one another. Now, 2 of those games were available on the Wii U, but the ideal way to play them was on the Switch. And if those games weren't for you, there were a load of other games that came out during the year that really set the foundation of the Switch up for future success. The hybrid success of the console made it so anyone could play it and have a great time. Now, I think the only problem the Switch had this year, which was something that's plagued it its entire life cycle, is the fact that it didn't have a standalone pack-in game to make it really stand out. When you go back and look at the Wii, one of the first games that comes to everyone's mind is Wii Sports. And for good reason. It was packed into every Wii console from release. And though it wasn't the most complicated game of all time, it had something for everyone. And I mean literally everyone. It doesn't matter if you were a fan of baseball or boxing, you could play those games. And even if you weren't, it was still fun to play it with the motion controls. But the Switch didn't have anything packed in, so if you didn't buy a game day one, then you just had a cool looking console. But beyond that, the Switch was set up for an incredible success that only translated to 2018. Now, did 2018 live up to the hype that 2017 did? Not really, but it still had a bunch of good games. In March 2018, we got the release of Kirby Star Allies, which was the first Kirby game we got for the console. It had the traditional 2D side-scrolling gameplay of some early Kirby titles with the addition of multiplayer. Now, looking back, this game is kind of forgettable, but it's great that we got a new Kirby this early on. In May 2018, we got Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which is an enhanced version of the game that got ported over from the Wii U, and it added new things like the ability to play as Funky Kong, which made the game a little bit easier for people who weren't looking for a hard challenge. Now, on the Wii U, you could pick this up for about $40 because of Nintendo Selects, But when it came out for the Switch, it was priced at $60. And that just left a bad taste in my mouth, because if it was $40 on the Wii U and all they really added was Funky Kong, I couldn't justify buying a game I already owned for a character I wasn't gonna play as that much. But even with my pricing issue, it was still a great idea for Nintendo to bring their games from the Wii U over to the Switch. Like I said before, the Wii U didn't really do all that well, so they had a load of great games that were just sitting there not being appreciated. But I think after Donkey Kong Country, they realized they needed to add a little bit more to the games they were gonna bring over. In June, we ended up getting Mario Tennis Aces, which was a brand new Mario Tennis game, and I am so glad they didn't try and bring Ultra Smash over and just add on to it, because I'm sure as most of you know that Mario Tennis Ultra Smash was an absolute flop of a game. There are loads of people who have made videos about it, but I refuse to even touch that game, so I don't want to. But compared to Ultra Smash, Aces was an incredible game. It had an adventure mode, which was a really fun time, and the gameplay felt as crisp as ever. And even though this game has its issues because of the drip feeding of content, it's not a bad game by any means. In September, we ended up getting Nintendo Labo. I feel like I'm the only one who remembers this exists. This was just a bunch of pieces of cardboard that could be assembled into different kind of toys. You would click your Joy-Con into the Labo and you could play a bunch of different mini games. It was absolutely innovative, but I don't think anyone looks back and says this was a great idea. In November 2018, we ended up getting our first original Pokemon games for the console, with Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which are a successor to Pokemon Yellow that tried to bridge the gap between the original games and the Pokemon Go games. And visually, these games look absolutely incredible, but they really tried to force the Pokemon Go mechanics down your throat. And I get it, Pokemon Go released in 2016, and considering this released in 2018, it was a no-brainer to try and capitalize on how popular that game was. And trying to funnel those fans into the Switch ecosystem was a great idea, but I love Pokemon and I didn't really want to play a home console Pokemon game that had me trying to pitch my Joy-Con at a TV. It was a really simplified version of the main series games that wasn't bad, but it also wasn't that great. But I think the game that really cemented 2018 as the best year for the series was the release of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate in December. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is the biggest Smash game I think we're ever going to get. Now I think with the Switch 2, we're going to end up getting a Smash Bros. Ultimate Deluxe, which is going to be this game with the Mario Kart 8 treatment. But when this game released, it absolutely sent me through a wall. Every single fighter from any Smash Bros. Game is back in this game, and with a load of new ones sprinkled on top, including some fan favorites that people had been asking for like King K. Rool, Ridley, and the Splatoon fighters. This was an incredible idea. They easily could have ported over a deluxe version of Smash 4 to this console, but they went above and beyond and made a Smash game that combined everything that was great about the originals with a bunch of new stuff to make it really stand out. Now 2018 wasn't as good as 2017 was game-wise, but it did have some other features that were added. Like in September 2018, we got the release of Nintendo Switch Online, which, as divisive as this was at the time, I think this ended up becoming a net positive. Now, Nintendo is notorious for having some pretty mid online services. I think it's definitely gotten better as time's gone on, but especially with the earliest model of the Switch not having a built-in LAN support, it made it so the Switch really struggled to play online. But if you were an NSO member, you had the ability to play a load of classic NES games right on your Switch. Now at the time, everyone was like, wow, NES games, big whoop. Over time, they've added onto it to make it feel like a service that's really actually worth it. But overall, 2018 wasn't a bad year. I think we'll always live in the shadow of 2017, but it's still not bad at all. But they did a good job of keeping that momentum and continuously releasing more and more things that made the Switch really stand out. And they even further kept that momentum in 2019. 2019 was an incredible year for the Switch. It had a bunch of great game releases, an expansion of the Switch's online system, and I think their goal for this year was to really expand their library with a bunch of new innovative titles to reach a broader audience. And it started off hot in January of 2019 with Mario Bros. U Deluxe. Mario games on the Switch really love the term deluxe. I'm still kind of salty it didn't come with lettuce, tomato, and onions, but I guess it's fine. This is a port of New Super Mario Bros. U along with New Super Luigi U for the Switch. Now it's a new Super Mario Bros. Game, everybody knew exactly what they were gonna get, and that's just a decent Mario platformer with nothing that was really all that new about it. Now honestly, I kind of prefer to play this game on the Wii U as opposed to the Switch. When you play on the Wii U, you have the ability to have a friend use the gamepad to place blocks so it's easier for you to traverse. And there's no gamepad on the Switch, so it's not really possible. But it made sense to port New Super Mario Bros. U over. I just wish if they were gonna slap a $60 price tag on it, that they would have also brought the original New Super Mario Bros. Wii over alongside it. But I still own this game and I don't think it's bad, I just don't think it's worth it if you already owned it on the Wii U. A few months later, we ended up getting a brand new Yoshi game with Yoshi's Crafted World, which is a good idea. I'm kind of disappointed we haven't gotten a Woolly World port to the Switch yet, but Crafted World was a great way to scratch that itch. Now, this isn't my favorite Yoshi game of all time, but it's not bad. The game looks absolutely incredible, but it's a very one-note experience. The modern Yoshi games have been very, very easy, and this is no exception. You can beat this game without dying pretty easily, and the soundtrack just wasn't good. But it's a brand new Yoshi game, so I can't really be that upset. And then after a little bit of a dry spell, we ended up getting a game with endless replayability in Super Mario Maker 2, which is a sequel to the beloved Super Mario Maker that released for the Wii U, which added a boatload of new content for anyone to appreciate. Now, the series definitely worked better on the Wii U, but the fact that this had more content to it made it something that's definitely worth checking out, and it's definitely a better Mario experience than New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe was. A month later, we ended up getting Fire Emblem Three Houses, the first new Fire Emblem game for the Switch, which is honestly probably one of the best games on the console. It's absolutely one of the best entry-level Fire Emblem games you can play, and it had a great blend of tactical RPG elements and social sim elements that made you really feel like you were connected to the characters under your control. It has a great level of strategy and a really deep and engaging story that made it a really fun game all the way through. A few months later, we ended up getting a full remake of Link's Awakening. It took the classic Game Boy game and gave it a much-needed facelift, and made it one of the best-looking top-down Zelda games we've ever gotten. Now, I can understand if the art style isn't for you, but you can't say that it looks genuinely bad. It might not be your style, but it definitely has all of the charm that the top-down Zelda games were going for. I had only played Link's Awakening a few times on the Game Boy, and I didn't really appreciate it then, but getting a full remake of this game for the Switch made me appreciate how great this game truly is. In October, we got Luigi's Mansion 3, probably the best-looking game on the console to date. It released on Halloween Day and was one of the funniest games we've gotten for the console. Watching Luigi be petrified of his own shadow, especially when he has to fight actual ghosts, is something I'll really never get bored of. It had great level design and is one of those games that I think anyone can pick up and enjoy. But I think the most important game that came out during this year was Pokemon Sword and Shield, which released in November. Now, if you want to talk about a controversial game, this is one of them. It was the first new mainline Pokemon game that we've gotten for the Switch. And to put it nicely, it did a lot of things very differently. Now, as you might know, I actually really like this game, which is apparently a hot take, but I think it did a lot of things that were incredible. Now, the game has a lot of critics for a good reason. Firstly, it had the whole Dexit controversy, which meant that a lot of Pokemon that you love weren't going to be available in this game for the first time ever. So before this game even released, it was facing an uphill battle. And then it had a load of graphical issues, especially in the new Wild area. People were quick to compare this to games like Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, which came out the launch year of the console, which are both games that are visually stunning. And then you go into the Wild area of the new Pokemon game, and it looks like it was ripped straight off the PS2. But beyond those issues, if you were a fan of Pokemon, this was gonna be a great time. It was the first Pokemon game that added DLC, which meant that you weren't gonna get a Pokemon Spear. Though it has a lot of harsh critics, I think it did a lot of things that were great, like having a really nice gym battle system, having a bunch of nice regional and new Pokemon, and being able to do Dynamax raids, which made this a game that I think people should try again, because I think a lot of people overplay the hate on this game. But even beyond the incredible set of game releases, the Switch had a great year hardware-wise as well. In September of 2019, we got the release of the Nintendo Switch Lite. This was the first rework the console received, and I think it was a great one. The Lite model was designed to be a more affordable, handheld-only version of the original Switch. It was designed to be the on-the-go version, and I think it was a good idea. A lot of people only wanted to buy the Switch for the handheld accessibility. So for parents with multiple kids, or someone who didn't plan on using the docked portion of the console, this was a perfect idea. Especially being $100 cheaper than the standard model made it a great option for people who were budget conscious, and really expanded how many hands the Switch could get into. Now, if I had to pick, I would definitely pick the home console version because that's just who I am, but for a lot of people, they don't need all of the bells and whistles the original version had. And they continued to expand all of these offerings into 2020. Now, beyond 2017, I think the most important year for the Switch was 2020. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the past couple years, some stuff went down in 2020. And I don't think there was a better console for these trying times than the Nintendo Switch. Now, I think the first major release of this year was probably the most important one with Animal Crossing New Horizons. Now, talk about a game that came out at the perfect time. Right before the world started to get scary, Nintendo released probably the coziest and happiest game they possibly could have. Animal Crossing New Horizons took everything that was great about the prior Animal Crossing games and added a crafting DIY element that made it really stand out from the others. You would set up on an island and go into debt from Tom Nook as you helped him build an island paradise of your dreams. It had all of the fun of catching bugs, fishing, and collecting fossils that made this game really stand out. I think I'm one of many people who put arguably far too many hours into Animal Crossing during this time. And I still log in to this day and check out what my villagers are up to. Now, has this game held up as well as I would love it to? Not really. It didn't really get all that much content added to it over the years. But for releasing when it did, it had an impact that cannot be understated. A few months later, we ended up getting Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, which was a remaster of the 2010 Wii game, which brought a bunch of upgrades like brand new graphics, improved gameplay mechanics, and a bunch of new content that made this a better version of the already incredible game. I think this is how a lot of people played Xenoblade for the first time, and even though it's not Nintendo's most popular series, it's still an incredible time. I could be biased though because I love JRPGs, but it was great to see this game get ported to the Switch, especially with Xenoblade 2 being on the console already. In June 2020, we ended up getting Clubhouse Games, which was a collection of board games and card games, which is fine. I'm not going to sit here and say it's an impactful game, but if you like Chinese checkers, then this probably is the game for you. In July 2020, we ended up getting a brand new Paper Mario game with the Origami King, and I still won't get over how I learned this game was a thing because I logged into Twitter one morning and saw a trailer for a new Paper Mario game. No Nintendo Direct, no hype beforehand, just surprise, here's a trailer, which I'm not going to complain about. I love a nice surprise like this, and the game released and ended up being pretty solid. Now, for people like me who wanted a 1000-year door 2, this wasn't a game that brought Paper Mario back to its roots, but it did a lot of things that really made it stand out from other Paper Mario games, like bringing back some companions who weren't terrible, and having a pretty solid story overall. Now, in September of 2020, I think we got the second most important game of the year with the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection, which included Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy, all available on the Switch. Now, I will still never forgive Nintendo for not including Super Mario Galaxy 2, but I guess I can get over it for now. This game was absolutely incredible. Having a physical copy now is like a status symbol because this was a limited time only release. It was available in person and on the eShop for a limited time, and if you didn't buy it before the cutoff date in March 2021, you are not going to be able to get it after. Now, if you're lucky, you can probably find a copy of this at a game store, but I'll never truly understand why Nintendo decided to make this a limited time release. Don't get me wrong, I understand that it was a celebration for Mario's anniversary, but this is the only time we've ever gotten a release of Super Mario Sunshine outside of the GameCube. And to only give that out for a very short time just seems like a weird idea to me. The games are all incredibly solid, and they all play really well on the Switch, but I just wish they didn't make this a limited time release and gave it more of a shelf life like it deserves. In October of 2020, we ended up getting Pikmin 3 Deluxe, which was an enhanced version of the Wii U game. It added a bunch of new content and quality of life improvements, and it was another example of Nintendo just pushing Wii U titles onto the Switch, which for me was a great idea because I had this game on the Wii U, but I didn't really appreciate it as much until I played it on the Switch. It was one of those games that got overlooked because of the console it was on. So giving it new life on a console that was already more popular than the console it was on was an awesome idea. In November of 2020, we got Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, which was a prequel to Breath of the Wild, full of all of the Hyrule Warriors gameplay of the first game, but in a brand new package that made this the much better version. Now, I'm a big fan of the Hyrule Warriors games, and I think that this was an incredible idea. Even in 2020, people were still going crazy about Breath of the Wild because the game was just that important. You gotta see the real scale of the Day of Calamity and see what actually happened. And I don't think there was a better way to tell this tale than in a Warriors type fashion. The scale these games offer is absolutely insane. You can cut down 500 enemies in a single blow and not break a sweat. And it was a pretty solid game for them to end the year on. I don't think they wanted to end the year on this note, but considering there was some stuff going on, they kind of had to. Now, though this was probably one of the best years of the Switch, I think it was also one of the hardest. Now, I was really lucky I had a day one Switch I already owned. But if you were trying to get a Switch during this time, you were gonna have a really hard time. All of that stuff that was going on really affected the supply chain, and it made it so seeing a Switch on a shelf was like seeing a unicorn in the wild. And I think the scarcity of the console and everybody talking about how Switches were selling out left and right made it so people like scalpers were buying up all of the available units and flipping them for an absolutely ludicrous profit. And the stock issue lasted for a very long time. As soon as a new Switch would come into stock, someone would be there to buy it that same day. This was a hard time for a lot of people who were trying to get a Switch. And if you combine the incredible success of games like Animal Crossing New Horizons with a load of free time that everybody seemed to have, then the Switch was going to be an absolute monster this year. And they did an incredible job of continuing that momentum for another year in 2021. There was still a lot of those ongoing issues from 2020 and 2021, but this is when things started to get a little bit easier for companies, and a lot of the supply chain issues started to let up, which made it a lot easier for everybody to get a Switch. And Nintendo's goal was to keep that momentum going for as long as humanly possible, and it started in February with the release of Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury. I was really surprised it took them this long to get Super Mario 3D World onto the Switch. This game was one of the best Wii U games, and it was one of the most fun Mario games that we had in a long time. So to see it not get brought over to the Switch until 2021 was really weird to me. But when they announced that it was going to have the new Bowser's Fury game mode along with it, I think everybody started to understand why. Now 3D World by itself is a great game. It took all of the freedom and fun of the 3D Mario games and combined that with a more linear structure of the 2D games to make a game that really was the best of both worlds. I would have been happy just getting this game on the Switch with maybe a new character or two. But they blew me out of the water when they announced Bowser's Fury, a new expansion that was essentially its own game inside of this game. This is more in line with what a traditional 3D Mario game feels like, and I am so glad that I picked this game up. I actually picked this game up from Target, and I got a really cool water bottle that I still use to this day. But it was a fresh take on a classic formula that made making a second purchase of this game feel worth it. Some of the other games like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze didn't get enough to make me really want to buy it again. But having a full new game mode alongside it made it feel really worth the purchase. A few months later, we ended up getting a new Mario Golf with Mario Golf Super Rush, and I'm a big fan of Mario Golf, and this game is no exception, even though it did have some issues of its own. Now, as far as Mario Golf games go, this still has all of the arcadey fun that the series is known for. As far as graphics go, it looks absolutely incredible, and it had a great roster of characters that made it really stand out from other games in the series. It had the new Speed Golf game mode, which made it really stand out compared to other games. Thinking about it now, I actually play this game way more than I think I do, where I'll pick this game up and I'll play it for a little bit every month or so. But it had the same issue that Mario Tennis Aces did, where instead of having a bunch of content that you could unlock by playing it, they ended up just giving that content for free as small updates throughout the year. And I would much rather have a bunch of things that I could unlock than get a bunch of small updates to try and prolong the life of the game. But as far as Mario sports games go, it was nice to see that they were back on the right track. In July of 2021, we ended up getting Skyward Sword HD, which was a remaster of the 2011 Wii game that was one of the most divisive Zelda games of all time. Now, if you have any plans on playing Skyward Sword, this is the absolute best way to do it. Instead of having to play with the forced motion controls on the Wii, you were able to play with a button-based input that made this actually feel like a real Zelda game. And for the people who were patiently waiting for a new traditional 3D Zelda game to be released for the Switch, they were still going to be left waiting because this was a port, but at least it had button controls this time. But the enhanced visuals and quality of life improvements like skippable cutscenes made it a much better experience than the original, but I'm glad they ended up releasing this because it's definitely the best way to play this game. In September, we got WarioWare Get It Together, which was the first new WarioWare game for the Switch, which was just as chaotic and insane as all the others are. If you've played any of the WarioWare games, you know exactly what you're getting into. It's a collection of really fun micro games that keep you on your toes the entire time. I think this game is criminally underrated. Is it the best WarioWare game? Absolutely not, but it's still a really good time. Any video game that can get my goldfish brain to pay attention deserves an honorable mention. Now, the game I think was most important during this year was Metroid Dread, which released in October, and it was the first brand new 2D Metroid game in almost 20 years. Now, in the time that had passed from the last 2D Metroid game until this release, a lot of Metroidvanias had come out that showed that Nintendo is not the only one who can make these games. But Nintendo clapped right back and made one of the best Metroidvanias of all time. Seriously, if you haven't played Metroid Dread, what are you doing? I get that these games might not be for everybody, but this is one of the best games on the Switch. It had incredibly smooth controls, one of the best atmospheres in all of gaming, and one of the most menacing enemies I've ever faced in a video game. Seriously, I cannot recommend this game enough. If you are a fan of Metroidvanias, please play this game. In November, we ended up getting Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Now, I'm not going to roast this game for the 100th time. It's probably the most classic Pokemon game experience we've gotten on the Switch, for better or for worse. The game itself isn't bad, I put hundreds of hours into it, but compared to other games in the series, it just isn't the best and is pretty far from it. But Nintendo did a good job keeping good games coming out consistently throughout the year in 2021. But I don't think any of the games can compare to the most important thing Nintendo did during this time, and that's release the Nintendo Switch OLED model, which is up and away the best version of the Switch and is not even close. When people ask me, Straw Hat, what model Switch should I get? I give them two options. If you only plan on playing handheld, then it's 100% worth just getting the Switch Lite. It's more cost effective and it does a better job at what it's supposed to, even if it's a downgraded model compared to the others. But if you plan on playing the Switch like intended, it is 100% worth springing the extra $50 for the OLED model. It has a 7-inch display, which is better in every single way. It has better speakers, a better stand, more internal storage, and a dock that offers LAN support. I really can't think of any reason to buy the original model if the OLED exists. Now, is this the Switch Pro that everyone was saying was gonna happen? No, it was not. But to be honest, I think I would rather have this than a Switch Pro. That way people who only own a Switch Lite don't feel left out when a game comes out that only works for the Pro. But not only did Nintendo release an entire new version of the Switch, they also released an expansion to online with the Online Expansion Pack tier. Now, it was a more expensive version of NSO, but it came with things that made it absolutely worth it. First, it came with a bunch of N64 games, and as a surprise to pretty much everyone, it also included Sega Genesis games, and it even gave access to expansions like Happy Home Paradise for Animal Crossing, and eventually the Mario Kart 8 Booster Pass expansion. Now, as someone who didn't use the online features much at this point, I absolutely still upgraded because look at that. I could play N64 games, are you kidding me? Now, the N64 games didn't run perfectly at first, but over time they've gotten way better. And with this incredibly strong year, you would think the Switch would start slowing down a little bit, but it only continued chugging along in 2022. Throughout this year, the Switch continued to be an absolute dominant force in the gaming world, and Nintendo continued to push the console into as many hands as humanly possible. Now, the first major game that released this year was Pokemon Legends Arceus, one of the most unique Pokemon games we have or probably will ever get. It took the Pokemon formula and twisted it so well that it's one of the most standout experiences on the console. I don't think a lot of people would disagree saying this is the best Pokemon game on the Switch, because it not only had an incredible region to explore, but it also had a brand new way to experience the Pokemon world. It had semi-open world environments where you travel to different areas and explore, where you were tasked with completing the first ever Pokédex. Instead of encountering a Pokemon in a random battle or walking up to him in a wild area, you could just sneak around and beam a Pokeball at the back of a Pokemon's head and catch it that way. Battles were also changed a lot and allowed you to move around the Pokemon battlefield to get a different perspective on the fight and pick between agile and strong moves to have a little bit different of an effect. And it really became one of my favorite Pokemon experiences of all time. And a few months later, we got a surprising release with Nintendo Switch Sports coming out in April, which was a spiritual successor to Wii Sports and was an interesting game to say the least. It brought back some favorite games like tennis and bowling, and then added some weird ones like soccer and badminton. Now, it used Joy-Cons in a similar way that Wiimotes were used in Wii Sports, and they made a half-decent sports game for the Switch. Now, was this game anywhere as good as Wii Sports was? No, not really. But I played this game more than I thought I would. It had a decently cool unlockable system, which you could customize your character by playing the game, but unlike Wii Sports, it wasn't a pack-in game with the console, so for a decently sized price tag, I don't think this game was that worth it. If this was a console pack-in game at the launch of the system, I wouldn't be upset. But the fact that they waited 5 years into the release of the system in order to release it, it was pretty much too little, too late. Now, a few months after that, we ended up getting a new Mario Strikers game with Mario Strikers Battle League in June, and it was the first Mario Strikers in over a decade. Now, was this game that good? Not really. I don't think it was bad, but it's definitely the worst Mario Strikers game. It kept all of the over-the-top soccer action from the other Strikers games, but everything just kind of felt flat. The gameplay felt just as good as ever, but it didn't really have enough content to keep it engaging. It had the same issues that the other two Mario Sports games did, but I feel like it was the most prevalent here with the drip-feeding content. It didn't have a big roster of characters to start with, and then when they added more, it didn't feel like it was that worth it to check out. So now playing it, it feels like a more complete game, but playing it when it first came out, and it really didn't. Now, I even went to the Nintendo World Store in New York City to pick this game up, with the hope that this would be the first Mario sports game in a long time to put the series back in the right direction, but it really ended up just feeling like it was a one-note soccer experience. Don't get me wrong, the game is beautiful, but I really wanted something more. In July, we got one of my favorite games for the year, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. As you can probably tell by this point in the video, I'm a pretty big fan of the Xenoblade series. This isn't my favorite Xenoblade game, but it's definitely still a great one. It had a great story with pretty complex characters and a good battle system that made it a really fun JRPG for anyone who's a fan of those. But I think the most surprising game for this year ended up being Splatoon 3. Now, I'll be honest, I really didn't expect a new Splatoon game to come out for the Switch. We already had Splatoon 2, so I figured they were just gonna keep adding to that game as opposed to releasing a brand new one, but I am not going to complain because this game is just as fun as you think it is. It improved on Splatoon 2 in pretty much every way, in my opinion. It feels like a much more thought out and balanced experience than Splatoon 2 was. Now, I will say I prefer the maps in Splatoon 2, but gameplay wise it was a night and day difference, and they've really made a better Splatoon experience with Splatoon 3. In October of 2022 we actually got Bayonetta 3, which I was surprised about. The anticipation on this game was real, and I'm not the biggest Bayonetta fan, but it was actually a pretty decent time. Bayonetta games aren't really my cup of tea. I find them to be a little too over the top. But one of my friends is a big Bayonetta fan, and he says that this game is everything he wanted and more, so I'll take his word for it. But I think the most important game that came out this year was Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now, this game was almost as controversial as Sword and Shield was, but for different reasons. Now, the main problem with this game is that it doesn't run well on the Switch. And to point out, this game is only available on the Switch, so that's a pretty big problem. It was the first fully open world Pokemon game, allowing you to freely explore the region in any order you want for the most part. Now, they pitched this game as the first open world of Pokemon experience where you can choose your adventure in any order. But that's not really the case. The levels of the Pokemon in the wild and in gym and event challenges do not scale to the Pokemon level you're at and have a pretty predetermined order of what you should do and when. There isn't technically an 8th gym, but there is a gym with the most powerful Pokemon that you should probably do last. And it's unfortunate because I feel like if they had a couple more months of development time, they could have made a Pokemon experience that was truly an open world experience like they were going for, but they didn't, and the game doesn't feel like the true Pokemon experience that everybody was wanting. But if you can get past the technical issues and false promises, then it actually is a pretty solid Pokemon game, but those issues are kind of hard to work past. But 2022 was arguably the worst year to be a Switch fan. It wasn't a bad year by any means, but compared to the other incredible years we'd gotten, there wasn't as much to make it really stand out. But with 2023 around the corner, everything was going to change again with another incredible year for the Switch, including a huge lineup of new games, more expansions to NSO, and the first rumors starting to circulate about the Nintendo Switch's successor. Now, the first couple months of 2023 were kind of dead, but when May came around, the world flipped upside down with the release of Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. The incredibly anticipated sequel to Breath of the Wild had finally released, and it took everything that was great about Breath of the Wild and expanded upon it. Now, Tears of the Kingdom is one of my favorite Switch games and favorite games of all time. It continued the story that was set up by Breath of the Wild and expanded on the world in ways that I didn't think were possible. With the addition of the Underworld and Sky Islands, made this a phenomenal game to explore where when you play, you will find something new almost every time you do. Now, this game is the definition of there is no wrong way to play. Using the new mechanics in the game, you could pretty much glue any two items together to make anything your heart desires. One of the main complaints about Breath of the Wild is that though the world was so huge and expansive, there really wasn't all that much to do in the overworld. Sure, you could do whatever you wanted, but there was large open areas where there was literally nothing. But in Breath of the Wild, they added more to almost every single area you would explore in. I think Tears of the Kingdom is an absolute must-play for anyone who's a fan of Zelda or just video games in general. And it was definitely the biggest and most important game that released for the Switch this year. But because of how big and important this game was, I think a lot of other games got overshadowed because of it. A month later, in June of 2024, we ended up getting the long-anticipated Pikmin IV. I had been waiting for so long for a new Pikmin game, and I'm so glad that we got it. It didn't feel as much like the other Pikmin games as the rest did, but it still was just as fun as I thought it would be. There's something about seeing a bunch of little creatures carry a battery that I think is just great. It brought the Pikmin series to an entire new audience, and it was one of my most played games this year. But I think what really held it back is that it released right around the time of Tears of the Kingdom, and I know they don't have the same fan base for the most part, but I think when you have a game that's as big as Tears of the Kingdom is, other games that come out around the same time are gonna get pushed to the side. And this unfortunately got that treatment. In August, we got Metroid Prime Remastered, which I was really surprised we ended up getting. This was a remaster of the original Metroid Prime game originally released on the GameCube, with a load of quality of life enhancements that make this a clear upgrade from the original. Not only were the visuals completely overhauled, but the controls work so much better, and there was a load of quality of life improvements that make it stand out so much more than the first did. It was a faithful recreation that made the game so much easier to play. My only issue is I wish they remastered Metroid Prime 2 and 3 as well, but I guess I'll take what I can get. Anything that scratches my itch before Metroid Prime 4 comes out is good for me. But arguably just as important as Tears of the Kingdom was Super Mario Bros. Wonder, the first brand new 2D Mario game we'd gotten in over a decade. Nintendo finally got away by marking every new Mario game as a new Mario game, and they completely redid the Mario experience in a game where really anything can happen. Now, Mario Wonder feels just as crisp as any Mario game we've ever gotten, but it is dripping with so much charm it really stands out as one of the best Mario games in the entire series. If you've only played this game once or haven't played it yet, I really recommend checking it out. Everything that makes a Mario game great is in this game with a load of new stuff. The badge system makes it so you can play the game in any way you want to, with a bunch of different buffs that make replaying levels more exciting than it was the first time. Some fun and creative power-ups like Elephant Mario and Bubble Mario, which are really unique and incredibly fun, and the biggest roster of selectable characters that we've ever gotten in a Mario game. Trust me when I say that Mario Wonder will go down in history as one of the best Mario games of all time. And Nintendo wasn't even done in 2023, we also got a new WarioWare with WarioWare Move It. Was this game that big? Not really. But I like WarioWare games, so I felt like if I didn't mention it that he would shake me in my sleep. 2023 I think was the second most important year in the Switch's life cycle, purely off of game releases. I think it was the last big year we're gonna get until the new Nintendo console comes out, and 2023 was the first time we started hearing rumors circulate about the new Switch model, some of which that seemed like they were far too good to be true, and others that felt like they were kind of weird. But the Switch was getting older, so it was only a matter of time before people started speculating on what it could be. Which leads us into the current year of 2024, where Nintendo has strangely decided to continue the momentum of the Switch, which I am not going to complain about, but usually a console would be dead by now. Now, a typical console lifecycle is only about 7 years, and as of 2024, the Switch is officially 7 years old, and it doesn't really seem to be signs of slowing down all that much, but this was the year we started to get some official reports from Nintendo about the Switch 2. But game-wise, Nintendo kept doing exactly what you'd think, and that's releasing absolute bangers. And the first game that really stood out was Princess Peach's Showtime. This was the first time Princess Peach had a starring role since the release of Super Princess Peach in 2005. So after nearly 20 years, to see Peach get a starring role in a game was really fun. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say this game was incredible, but it definitely wasn't bad. The main theme of the game is that you're on stage, so you end up taking the role of different costumes throughout the game. You can be a ninja, a figure skater, or a detective, and they all play a little bit differently, but come together really well to make a unique gameplay experience that's fun all the way through. I went in with some kind of middle-of-the-road expectations, and didn't expect this game to be as fun as it was. But it ended up being just as good as I hoped it would be, and I really think it stands out as probably the best Peach game we've ever gotten. Sorry to the 3 fans of Super Princess Peach. That game was fine, but I mean, it doesn't really compare to this. Visually, this game was just as good as any of the other games were on the Switch, and it was a great lighthearted time that finally gave Peach her much anticipated time in the spotlight for the first time in a long time. Then a few months later, we got a remake that I never thought would see the light of day, with Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door being moved on over to the Switch in May. Now, this game is absolutely stunning. It's the same game as it was on the GameCube, with some quality of life adjustments that make it just as fun, if not more fun, than it was there. When people look back at the Paper Mario series, this is what they were talking about when they say it was absolutely iconic. It's an incredible world to explore with so much fun to be had, with some of the best RPG mechanics in a Nintendo game. It's an incredible remake and the first Paper Mario remake we've ever gotten. I'm really surprised they ended up releasing this game because there's another Mario RPG coming out this year that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but if you haven't played Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, there is no reason you can't anymore. It's one of the best Mario RPGs ever made, and it is 100% worth your time if you have any interest in it at all. Then after a boring couple of months, we ended up getting one of the most anticipated games of the entire year, The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. Now, I will take any excuse I possibly can to talk about this game because I am still pleasantly surprised with how great this game ended up being. I didn't expect this game to be as good as it was because I didn't really know much about it going in. There wasn't that much information about what it was going to be like prior to release, and when it came out, I was really surprised of how deep and engaging this game was. It took the style of The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening remake that we had and put a brand new spin on the world of Hyrule to make one of the best games we've gotten in the series. That's not an exaggeration. Echoes of Wisdom is one of the best top-down Zelda games ever made. Does it play like a traditional Zelda game? No, not really. But that didn't stop Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, now did it? Now, the main thing that's different about this game than any other Zelda game ever is that you play as Zelda for a majority of the story. And she has a friend named Tree and a magic wand that allows you to spawn echoes of things that you've seen along your adventure. Whether that's enemies that you fought or beds that you slept in, you can spawn them to solve issues around Hyrule. It created one of the most fun and satisfying gameplay loops that I've had in a Zelda game, and I really can't recommend this game enough to anybody who's ever wanted a new traditional Zelda experience that does something that's extremely different. A few weeks after that, in October, we got Super Mario Party Jamboree, which has quickly become my favorite Mario Party game in recent years. This is a best of both worlds, combining everything that was great about Super Mario Party and Mario Party Superstars together in one package that is full of content for anyone to love. Now, my biggest issue with the original Mario Party games is that they were lacking content, and that is not the case with this game. There are so many different game modes to play, whether you're looking to play with friends or by yourself, and this is exactly what they need to do with Mario Party in the future. Traditionally, Mario Party has always been a board game type game with a bunch of mini games to space it out. And Nintendo did an incredible job with this game, adding content that feels naturally placed in, but is all incredibly new and fresh. The new additions like Paratroopa's Flight School, Toad's Factory, and Rhythm Kitchen are all really fun standalone modes, which do a good job of fitting in with the traditional Mario Party experience, without retracting from it too much. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say this is the best Mario Party of all time. I definitely need to give it a few more months of gameplay, but so far I'm absolutely loving it, and so are my friends. But the last big release for the year is, of course, Mario & Luigi Brothership, which I think is the most important game coming out this year solely because the Mario & Luigi series is not dead. Now, I can't be the only one who assumed that when Alpha Dream went bankrupt that Mario & Luigi was a dead series. And personally, I was devastated because it's one of my favorite Nintendo series of all time. But when they announced Mario & Luigi Brothership, I almost started foaming at the mouth. I think it's the single most underrated series that Nintendo has ever produced, and if you are at all a fan of turn-based RPGs, this is going to be an incredible time for you. Now, 2024 wasn't the biggest year for the Switch, but during the latter half of the year, there's been a lot of speculation and potential leaks about the new successor console, the Switch 2. And just like the early days of the Switch leaks with the NX, a lot of things are becoming more and more prevalent that I'm not surprised about. Now, I can't see them cutting off support for the Switch immediately when the Switch 2 comes out, especially with big games like Metroid Prime 4 being just around the corner. But I think there's some absolute give-ins of what's going to happen with the Switch 2 when it releases. The first thing that I think is an almost guaranteed thing is that the new Mario Kart game is going to be a launch title. Do we have evidence this is being developed? No. But we haven't gotten a true new Mario Kart game since Mario Kart 8 came out, and I'm 100% certain Nintendo's not going to release a new console without some sort of huge new IP for it, and what better way than the best-selling series Nintendo has, Mario Kart. With Mario Kart 8, we've seen more and more Nintendo characters get added, like Splatoon characters and Link from Legend of Zelda, so I wouldn't be surprised if characters like Kirby made a debut, and made Mario Kart more of a series akin to Smash Bros, where it just is a celebration of video game history. Now, of course, it's gotta be a stronger console, and I think considering they already have the OLED Switch, it's gonna have an OLED screen. It's probably gonna be a little bit bigger and a little bit more high quality, but I'm 100% certain it's gonna keep the hybrid nature the Switch has come to know. And it only makes sense. For most of Nintendo's life, they've had two separate consoles out at any given time. A handheld console that usually does way better, and a home console that's stronger but usually isn't as good sales-wise. But the Switch is a goldmine for both fans, because families are buying new consoles for all of their kids, which boosts the numbers sales-wise, but each console is still at heart a home console with all of the power behind it. I can't see Nintendo going back to having two different kinds of consoles, especially with the Switch being one of their best-selling consoles of all time. And there are so many reasons that I think the Switch is going to go down as one of the most important consoles ever made. And I'm glad Nintendo made the shift to not trying to compete as much with companies like PlayStation and Xbox, because most people who are buying a Nintendo console aren't doing it for the cutting edge graphics or the online multiplayer functionality, they're doing it for the love of gaming. Nintendo is a company that owns so many incredible IPs, and considering they make their own hardware to play them on, they can control every single aspect of how those games play and deliver an experience that isn't possible otherwise. And as sad as I am that the Nintendo Switch's life cycle is coming to an end, I am just as excited to hear about what new beginnings are going to come next. What are your favorite games that released for the Nintendo Switch? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching. I hope that you and your family have an incredible rest of your day, and if you like anything that you saw here, please consider subscribing.